many possibilities of السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
And do you want to share the last thing?
Assalamu alaikum. How are we all doing? How's the voice? Can you all hear?
عليكم السلام.
وعليكم السلام. Yes, we can hear.
السلام.
السلام ورحمة
Okay.
الله وبركاته. Yes, the voice is clear, أستاذنا. الحمد لله.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, if it becomes unclear, please let me know. Either speak up or write in the chat box. طيب, بإذن الله, what I'd like to just ensure is that everyone has a pen and paper, or a pen and a notebook, because we will be going through i'rab. So the whole, I mean, you could say one of the major purposes, and if you were to take the course for this purpose alone, it would be sufficient, is to learn i'rab practically, according to the manner that it's used in the late Arab school of grammar. Why that in particular? Because that's used quite frequently and throughout works of tafsir, and it's kind of the de facto standard in works of tafsir, works of explanation of hadith, of the mu'allaqat and what have you. So, in order to be able to, to learn i'rab, you have to write out i'rab and you have to memorize i'rab. So, will this be about rote memorization? There will be a large part of memorization, but it shouldn't be rote. There should be understanding. That's the whole point of taking the course. And actually, I would claim that if you just memorize things, then you can't do i'rab later on in other examples. You have to actually understand them. Right. So please ensure. Do we need to take a couple minutes off for everyone to find a pen and a pen and paper, or are you all ready?
I'm ready.
Does
Okay.
a document, a Google Drive document work?
I would say, can you type Arabic from can you type Arabic quickly from without looking at the keyboard?
Yes.
Okay, then it might work for you. It might work for you. Okay, type. So let's start this. Okay, let me take a look at the. Okay, Bismillah. Type. I will share the screen, and I might share a different screen later on a Word document when typing out the examples of the i'rab. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا، وزدنا من فضلك علما نافعا وعملا صالحا متقبلا، وزدنا من فضلك حكمة وتعليما خالصا لوجهك موفقا. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا، وأنت يا حي يا قيوم تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا. So, decoding Qatr al-Nada. Now, what someone once said, what a professor once said, is that taking the same course with two different professors is more different than taking two different courses with the same professor. And so, because of this, we're going to start this with about the instructor, myself. Then we're going to talk about the course and how to benefit most from it, inshallah. A bit about the history of Arabic grammar, about the text itself, some extra reading, a little bit about morphology and Alahan's ver, and then we're going to talk about elementary concepts in parsing. And whenever there's an advanced course or whenever you're doing graduate level work, and the name of the subject is elementary, you should understand that that you may need to pay attention, or you may need to be a little bit scared there, because what does it mean when they say elementary concepts in parsing, or elementary, concepts in algebra when it's a graduate level course, right? What do they mean here? Well, as we'll discuss, Arabic, a lot of the Arabic disciplines, the vastest of the Arabic disciplines is perhaps balagha, right? But many of the Arabic disciplines are not very vast but rather they are or not very broad. Sorry, they're not broad, but they are deep, right? And one of the things I need to impress upon you is to think about simple matters deeply. And if you do that, if you just learn this text, but you really understand it, along with the additional material that we're going to cover that isn't in the text. In particular, we're just going to go through the verb and pronoun charts. Make sure you have those memorized. We're going to ensure that you understand the concept of ta'alluq. That isn't in this text, inshallah, and a little bit of inter sentence parsing, like how sentences play roles in other sentences. So we're going to talk about those in this course, inshallah. And as such, I want you to understand some of the so I assume everyone here has done grammar in the past and is familiar with the concepts. So what we're going to do at the end of this class is we're going to go over some a number of concepts that you've been that you're already familiar with or have been familiarized with in the past, and we're going to cover them in a kind of like a high level sense so that you can understand how this machine or this field called grammar all fits together and what we're actually going to do, so that you can. So I'm trying to give you near the end an idea, an overview of the forest, as opposed to the before you start before we head in and start examining the trees. Right. So about the instructor, that's myself. My name is Mustafa. I am ethnically Egyptian, was raised in Canada, lived there and in the US until 2006, moved to Jordan. I work as I work with languages. So I work with both human and computer languages. So I program computers and I translate. I teach mostly things related to language, such as grammar and prosody and the mu'allaqat, the hanging odes of the pre-Islamic poets. My area of translation specialization is basically early and classical Islamic and Arabic texts. One of the things about me is that one of my goals, inshallah, is not to have you merely understand our tradition, but to be convinced of it. And so at all times, I want you to, as you're receiving this knowledge, as you are reading about matters, I want you to ask yourself if you're convinced of it as a model. I mean, there isn't really absolute truth or falsehood in something like grammar, but if you're convinced of it as a model, right? And these choices that we make as intellectuals, they actually have long-term effects, right? And part of the corruption of the human mind, which is related to the corruption of religion, is related to oversimplifying concepts at very fundamental, or having fundamental mistakes in methodology, in how one understands language and how one deals with language even. And so internalizing a model of how language works, and really being convinced of it, is something that I want to impress upon you. And so so I don't want you to accept what I say, for example, if you find that it doesn't, that you don't agree with it, or you can't understand it. We can discuss it until you actually do understand it. So the goal isn't to just memorize, but to or to understand, but to be convinced that this is a valid and a cohesive model. So that's what I expect of you. I expect of you to insist that you understand what's going on and are convinced of it. Right. about the course, we'll get to that, as well as the history of Arabic grammar and the text, inshallah. طيب. So what is the subject matter here? The subject matter of this course, I guess you could say, is syntax or nahu, and parsing or inflection, i'rab. So and the vehicle that we're using is Qatr al-nada. And so the idea here is to understand. So it's two things and their application. So what do I mean by that? So the first thing is syntax, knowing the rules of how words change. So if we just skip over this for a second and go to the third point here, and let's talk about the ulum, the disciplines of Arabic. Okay, so there's this thing there's this discipline called lugha, right? And people often translate that when they're translating the ulum or the disciplines of Arabic as language. It's not exactly language, and in the past they may have called it lexicology, but it's lugha includes lexicology actually would include morphology or sarf. So lugha isn't that. Lugha is about the meanings of words and the usage of language. Like, for example, in the idea of how, for example, in Arabic, you would say abyad wa aswad, whereas in English you'd say black and white. And even though there's no logical meaning or no logical reason, no good reason why in English you don't say white and black, and in Arabic you don't say aswad wa abyad. Those are nonetheless parts of the language, right? And that's encapsulated in lugha. So lugha includes things like usage and definitions. So it's the meaning of words. Sarf is the form of words. So given a three-letter root or other root, how do you apply the various different forms to produce new verbs, to produce new nouns with various meanings? And I would say if you can study sarf as a Daisy and nahu as an Arab, that would be ideal, right? Because sarf in the Daisy methodology is memorized, and they're really, I mean, it's like memorizing the multiplication table, right? It's something you have to do, and you thank your parents for forcing you into it later on in life, and without it, you're at a loss. And so the Daisy method of doing sarf is has very good results, right, and a low error rate. And nahu. So sarf is kind of like the DNA of a word. How so lugha is you can say kind of it's ruh, and sarf is the DNA, it's actual or the body, the form, right? Nahu is its role, its job, what it does, whether it's a housewife or a plumber or a doctor or whatever. So nahu is about the role of words, right? And because nahu is about the role of words, the first thing that you ever study in nahu is what? What is the first mabhath? What's the first lesson in nahu?
باب الكلام.
كلام.
Kalam, exactly, right? Because you can study sarf, divorced from kalam. It's about the word. You can study lugha sometimes, not always, divorced from kalam, because some aspects of lugha are specifically about kalam and some are about the kalimat, right? But you can study lugha divorced from kalam. You can study sarf divorced from kalam. But for nahu, it only ever makes sense in the context of kalam, in the context of actual speech. Why? Because nahu is talking about their role, not their form. So nahu doesn't care that you are a 28-year-old male Pakistani British person. That's not nahu, what nahu cares about. Okay, that's sarf. Sarf cares about that sort of thing. Nahu is what's your education, what's your job, basically your CV, right? So nahu is the role that the word plays, and you can think of the you can think of the لا محل له من الإعراب as being non-playing characters, right? No. طيب. طيب. So and then if we look at the discipline of bayan is basically the bayan, ma'ani, and badi'a are the three disciplines of rhetoric of balagha in Arabic. Bayan, and here's another thing about Arabic that's so cool. Bayan is the study of figurative expression, right? Now, what does bayan mean? It actually means to make something clearer, right? To clarify something, to demonstrate something. So it's interesting that speaking figuratively as opposed to literally, is actually sometimes the best way to clarify something, right? And if you just think about, that the wrestler, that Muslim wrestler, Khabib Nurmagomedov. Okay, if a guy were to tell another guy, Habib's an animal, right? That's tashbih, right? We all understand what that means, and we all understand what that means much quicker than we would understand if we were to say he's fierce, he'll hurt you. Don't fight the dude, right? By just saying that Habib, by saying Habib is an animal, we have summarized basically everything that we wanted to say in a much clearer manner than we could ever say literally, right? And so it's kind of interesting how it's called bayan in Arabic, even though you think that bayan, that the more literal you are, the more literal you are, the better. Please excuse me for 1 minute. No, and then there's ma'ani, and ma'ani is basically optimizing syntax, and that's when I said pre-balagha in the course write-up. What I was talking about is that when Jurjani was inventing his or refining the concept of nazm, which later became basically a study of ma'ani and bayan. So he, like, Jurjani, as a by the way of studying the Quranic miracle, invented 2/3 of balagha, right? So that's the level of person you're talking about when you're talking about Abdul Qahir. And what did he say nazm was? And nazm is basically ma'ani, ma'ani and bayan. But what did he basically say? And it really summarizes ma'ani. He says, "An-nazmu tawakhi ma'ani nahu." Nazm, which is really ma'ani. Ma'ani is about pursuing grammatical meanings. And so what ma'ani does is it takes, so when you study nahu and you study ma'ani, okay, what you're doing is you're taking, that is basically the border between form and meaning. What is the difference between I am a lion and I am lion and lion I am? You know what I mean? So reversing the order of the subject and the predicate, all the things that you study in Nahu as options, applying those is basically Ma'ani, right? And so I'm not claiming that we're going to study Ma'ani at all on purpose, but we'll be prepping our minds for the study of Ma'ani when we do I'rab. Okay, and so the subject matter that we're going to be covering here, and Qatr al-Nada is just a vehicle for it. The subject matter is syntax, is nahu, and parsing or inflection. So nahu is the study of how words change due to due to grammatical or syntactic operators. In other words, due to a change in their syntactic role in the sentence, right? And so you may have a role as a programmer at work, and a role as a son, and a role as an imam, for example, in some contexts, and a role as a teacher, and a role as a da'i, and a role as a husband, and a role as a this, and a role as a that, right? So you are one person, sarf wise, right? But you have various roles depending on the context that you find yourself in, or the role that you the context that you find yourself in, and then those roles are reflected. And so that's the whole idea of syntax, is finding how this word changes, right? And then i'rab has two different meanings. I'rab can mean parsing something out. So it's the act of saying what is marfu' and what its sign is, what is mansub and what its sign is, and why it's marfu' or mansub or majroor or majzoom or la mahalla lahu min al-i'rab. All of that parsing is called i'rab. But i'rab is also the actual change that occurs in a word because of a change in its role. So it has two different meanings. So is it clear to you that two different meanings of i'rab? Are we good?
If you could one more time, please.
Okay, no problem. Sorry. Okay, so i'rab can mean I give you a sentence and I say parse it out, and when you write that out, that's called i'rab. So that's one meaning of it. Okay. Another meaning of i'rab is that the word is the opposite of bina. That the word change? Does the word change or does it not change? Right? Is the word mabni or mu'arab? So that's another meaning of i'rab. So when you're doing the first meaning of i'rab, which is the parsing, you're clarifying the second meaning of i'rab, right? So i'rab is the actual inflection. So if I were to say, i'rab meaning number one, I give you a sentence, you parse it out, that's i'rab. I'rab meaning number two is that this word actually its end changes or doesn't change. Like what? Like Zayd. Zayd would be a mu'arab word, right? Whereas, for example, alladhi would be a mabni word. So the second meaning of i'rab is the opposite of bina. Are we okay there?
Yes.
Yes, it's clear. Jazakallah.
Yes, Sheikh.
Yes, go ahead. Okay. Now, when people say grammar, often that includes both nahu and sarf, both syntax and morphology. Naam. And in some old books, you'll find that nahu includes both as well. Nahu will include nahu and what we now call sarf. So there are two basic. You can basically split nahu into two. Okay, there's the how, and there's the when. Right? There's the how, and there's the when or the why. You could call it a when or a why. So the how of nahu is how does its i'rab state manifest, right? So, and that's the study of the beginning of any nahu book, and it's really short and it's really easy, and you probably have it memorized. And if you don't, you should have it memorized. So that's the, like, if I tell you the ism mufrad, what's alamat al-rafa, right? Or you could, I guess you could call it, instead of the how, I thought of it as a how, but I guess you could call it a what. Perhaps better than a how and a when would be a what and a why. Let's say, okay. If we say a what, so what is the alamat al-rafa of an ism mufrad? You'll tell me a dhamma. Alamat nasb, a fatha. What is the alamat jar of a jama' mudhakkar salim? You'll tell me a ya, right? So having all these rules memorized as to what the sign of i'rab is, right, is one part of nahu. And the second part is the when or the why. What caused it? What caused it to be marfu'a? And there's two ways of asking that question. If you're asking it, if you ask when is it marfu'a, you're looking at language organically. If you ask what caused it to be marfu'a, then you're looking at it from the perspective of operator theory. And late grammar is very much built upon operator theory, that everything happens for a reason. If something's marfu'a, there's something that put it into the state of rafa. If there's something mansub, there's something that put it into the state of nasb. If there's something that's majroor, something put it in the state of jar, right? And same with the majzoom. And so you all, so anything that that has an ending that changes has an operator that acted upon it. Okay. So when I say daraba Zaydun Amra, okay, when I say daraba Zaydun Amra, okay, so Zaydun is marfu'a. Why is it? And so the how or the what is the dhamma. Okay, the how or the what is the dhamma. That it's marfu'. But how do you know it's marfu'a? That is the or when is it marfu'a, or what causes it to be marfu'a is the second half of grammar, which is so I guess what do you prefer, how and when, or a what and why, or a what and when? So the first half of grammar is what the states of words are and what the signs of them being in those states are. Like for example, if I were to ask you, anyone, what is the sign of the Jama' Mu'annath Salim in Nasb? What's the sign of the Jama' Mu'annath Salim in Nasb?
Yeah.
Jama' Mu'annath Salim.
Kasra.
خلق الله السماوات.
T,
No,
alif
exactly.
and ta.
Okay, so I'll change the slide to say the what and why before I send it out. So the what, the first half of Nahu is and it's a much smaller half than the second one. The first half of Nahu is the what. Okay, what is the sign of it being marfu', mansub, majroor, majzoom, and then the second is why. Why is it marfu'? Why is it mansub? Why is it majzoom? No. So, and if you're interested in computer science, then this second to last comment may be interesting to you. Otherwise, you can ignore it. And so syntax is basically working at the speech level, and that's what a nahu is. Whereas sarf is working at the lexical level. Now, and parsing, when you parse something, it lists out the syntactic analysis of particular sentences or constructions. What and why? Okay, alhamdulillah, good. Okay, so let's just take a practical look at this. When we say ja'a Zaydun, ra'aytu Zaydan, marartu bi Zaydin. So what you notice is that the word changes, the word Zayd changes in each of these cases, but its change isn't just its change reflects a change in its role, right? You see the first one's marfu', the second one's mansub, the third one's majroor. In the first one, he's a subject. In the second, he's an object. In the third, the name Zayd is connected to the particle, so it's connected to the verb via a particle, right? And so languages like Arabic are called inflected languages. So, for example, a modern inflected language, a modern European inflected language would be something like Italian, right? Or there at least the verb conjugations. And when I say inflection or i'rab, I mean both verbs and both conjugation and declensions. So inflection includes both of them. So English isn't highly inflected, but it still does have some inflection, right? You say she loves me and I love her, right? You don't say her loves I, right? Or me love she. so even though English isn't highly inflected, there is still some inflection there. What I find actually, one of the signs that people have, or one of the things that people forget about English is the subjunctive. Like that he say. I don't know how many times people will have, say, do you mean that he says? No, it's the subjunctive. It's that he say. So English does have some inflection, but not a whole lot. Arabic is highly inflected, and because of that, because Arabic is highly inflected, the end result is that you can actually play around with emphasis much more in Arabic by playing with word order. So let's take a look at syntax versus morphology. So when we say ضرب المجنون الطالبة, ضرب المجنون الطالبة. So المجنون, in terms of صرف, it's an اسم مفعول, right? But in terms of نحو, it's a فاعل. So you understand that when we study sarf and when we study nahu, we're studying two very different things. So this may be obvious to you, but wanted to emphasize it. And so what you have here is you have an ism maf'ul that is a fa'il and an ism fa'il that's a maf'ul bihi. Okay, so we need to just the point of this example is for you to in case you're a little bit of a confused student, a bit rough in these disciplines, is to distinguish between an ism maf'ul, which is a mabhath, which is something that we study in sarf, from a maf'ul bihi, and an ism fa'il, which is something that we study in sarf from an actual fa'il, which is something we study in nahu. Okay, right. So what are the intended outcomes? Give me a second. Bismillah. Alhamdulillah. Okay. So first and most and foremost is an understanding of Arabic sentence structure, right? Arabic is not English encoded in a different way, right? Arabic is an entirely different language to English. And I don't know if any of you saw the embarrassment that was caused, that happened during an Arabic poetry competition, where the judges pointed out a mistake in the poet's grammar, and it was they who were mistaken. And so Arabic works very differently than English, and so and the only way to really internalize this is by going through many examples and many realistic examples, as well as we'll also be doing a good share of artificial examples. So by artificial examples, I mean, like, we will repeatedly use something like جاء رأيت مررت به, right, and repeatedly apply those to words so we can see their i'rab. But in addition to that, we will be using practical examples, inshallah. No. Right. So one is an understanding of Arabic sentence structure. Second is an internalization of how Arabic grammar works. That requires two things. That requires memorization and deep thought, right? You have to have both. To internalize anything, you must do both. So there's no way around it. Whenever we do i'rab, you have to internalize. You have to memorize it. Ability to parse sentences, verbs, and pronouns, inshallah. Now that is a primary goal. A secondary goal, which hopefully, inshallah, depending on your level, you'll get, is understanding ta'alluq of the jar and majroor and of the dharf, intra-sentence, or sorry, I should have said inter-sentence parsing, like how a sentence can play a role in another sentence, and operator theory. The goal, inshallah, is that you should be able to read grammatical discussions in books of tafsir and hadith commentary. And most importantly, perhaps, is that you know the question that you need to ask, and you know how to ask it so as to find a solution, and you can evaluate if the person in front of you knows what they're talking about or not. Because some people, you'll find that they may think they know the answers to these questions, but when you press, find that, Okay, it's clear that they merely memorize this and they don't actually know what's going on. And so, so the idea here, perhaps one of the greatest things you can get from this course is the ability to know how to ask the right question, how to Google things, and then once, I don't recommend, at all depending on Google, but once you Google something and find a reference for it, you can then look it up in its original source. And I actually do recommend that you do that, because I once found a quote everywhere online attributed to Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani in Fath al-Bari, and there was stuff omitted. So you shouldn't depend on Google searches alone, but they are a good way to get you where you want to go quickly, or at least to where they will at least tell you the direction to head quickly. Now, what is operator theory? Okay, so operator theory is the following. It's nadariyatul amil. And so the idea of operator theory, and we're going to talk about that today, inshallah. The idea of operator theory is that anything that is marfu' for a reason. Anything that's mansub is mansub for a reason. Anything that's majrur is majrur for a reason. And the reason is that there is a syntactical operator that acted upon the word and that put it into that state. Okay, so that's operator theory. Right. Now, moving forward. Yes, however, correct. No. And so, what are the habits? Think deeply about simple concepts. Man ahmal al-usul, hurim al-wusul. This is something that scholars say and shuyukh say. They say that whoever does not give due to fundamentals is prohibited from reaching. And so, if you, in this case, we're not talking about anything spiritual, but if you want to truly understand balagha and tafsir and how the Arabic language truly works, then you need to think deeply about these concepts. So grammar is not very broad, but it is deep, right? And so someone who had studied a little bit of a British lady who had studied a bit of Arabic, she's proofreading my translation of Qatr al-Nada, and she said, you know what, I kind of know all of this, but at a simple level. And I said, yeah, that makes sense, because the point of this course isn't to go over grammar. The point is to go into grammar, right? So the course material isn't very broad, but it is very deep. Okay, so you need to think deeply. You need to memorize the Arab examples and internalize them. There's no way around it. You have to memorize them and internalize them. You have to know why you're saying them that way, because as the examples change, you'll be using different examples. No. So don't just read what's expected of you. Read ahead, read other texts, watch YouTube videos, think critically, ask questions. And I want you to be convinced of everything. And I think I mentioned this before, that I went and spoke to Sheikh Ali Hani on an issue that was related to a popular Arab text of the Quran using two different views in one ayah that caused that were, they were a combination that didn't make sense. So Darwish, rahimahullah, who has an excellent book, but in one particular ayah, he actually uses two views that are incompatible with one another. And I spoke to Sheikh Ali Hani for 3 to 4 minutes or something, and benefited greatly from that conversation. But that's only because the night before I had spent 4 to 5 hours staring at that page, being confused and not knowing what was going on. And so you need to reach an understanding with yourself often, and then go to your teacher and ask, is this understanding correct? But and the teacher will often do a good job of making an idea clear to you. but you also need to, if you find things confusing, either ask questions or get yourself there and then ask for clarification, or get yourself part of the way there and then ask for clarifications, for clarification. So you really need to read and think critically and ask questions, and you can copy and paste things into the group and ask about them. Just don't ask me to translate pages and pages of text, or ask us to read things too long. Stay on topic. No. Right. Right. The history of Arabic grammar, we'll just go through this quickly. So there's the story of Abu al-Asad al-Du'ali, and his daughter apparently, according to the story, told him, "Ma ajmal as-sama'i," to which he replied, "Nujumuha," and she said, "No, I meant ta'ajjub," and he said, "Well, you should have said ma ajmal as-sama'." And according to the story, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu ta'ala anh, told him, "Unhu hadha nahu," as he was writing down the rules of grammar, like, pursue this course. So nahu is kind of like a direction or a course, right? That would be the literal meaning of it. No. So what we have is we basically have the Basran school, we have the Kufan school, and then we have the late school. So the Basran school was actually influenced by Persian and Greek thought and learning, right? And so what you basically have is you have the Persian, the ancient Persian madrasa system, for lack of a better term, or academic system, which was used in the pre-Islamic days, being repurposed being repurposed for Islamic and Arabic studies in former Persian lands. And so what you have in the Basran school is it was influenced by Persian Greek thought and learning. They had inherited a scholastic tradition, and because it was dominated by Persian thought, they looked at Arabic from the outside, right? And what I mean by that is that they basically reverse engineer. So what is grammar? It's basically reverse engineering Arabic syntax, how Arabs spoke. Now, when they reverse engineered it, they were looking at it from the outside, because they were non-Arabs, and because they had, are predominantly dominated by that, and because they had a scholastic tradition, they actually did a better job at it than the Kufan school, by and large. I mean, there are good points from both schools, but they did a better job at it than the Kufan school, and probably primarily due to these two factors, and a third one, which we'll discuss. One is that they had a scholastic tradition, right? And so, and those who study logic are not like those who don't study logic, right? And so, if you look at something that a discipline that the Arabs invented, that is almost through and through an Arab invention, it is arud. It is Arabic prosody, and it's horrifically difficult, right? Why? Al-Khalil was a genius, but he was a genius, Arab genius. I would claim the following: unless you're a remarkable intellectual, like along the lines of Imam Shafi'i, if you're a genius and you haven't studied Greek logic, then you're going to come across as being autistic, right? You're going to come across as being someone who can understand a lot of things, maybe, but cannot communicate it, right? And I would even, not to be hurtful or anything, but I would even claim that something like Arabic prosody, as per the traditional Arabic style, is kind of like an autistic discipline with respect to the others. It cannot communicate in any in a way that the others can understand, right? And so what you have in the Basran school and in the disciplines that were invented or were spearheaded by the Persians in general, is you have a very consistent logical extension of ancient academia, right? You have an extension of ancient academia into the Islamic disciplines, and so the Basran school has a shorter, more consistent rule base. The Kufan school has a larger rule base with that is doesn't have a lot of consistency in it. There are too many exceptions. A problem with the Basran school is that there is some artificiality. To make things work in the Basran school and to make it all consistent, they occasionally will say certain things in their Arab that seems artificial. But the whole point is to invent a simple system overall, right? They had higher standards with respect to shawahid. So what are shawahid? Shawahid are basically the citations that can be used as evidence in grammar, right? And so for something to be used as evidence in grammar, it has to be from the authoritative age, right? The authoritative age definitely includes pre-Islamic times, approximately up to 150 Hijri. It definitely includes up to the Mukhadramin, those who lived in the Jahiliyyah and Islam. According to most, it also includes early Islam, approximately until 150 Hijri. There are some exceptions though, like Imam Shafi'i. Even though he was born 150 Hijri, he would still be considered a Hujjah in language. So by and large, the Basran school had higher standards. So the Basrans were Persian dominated intellectuals, and their claim to fame when they were looking down their noses at the Kufan school, get this, was that they said that we take our shawahid from those who eat dub lizards, and you take your shawahid from those who eat yogurt. So eating yogurt, kind of the hallmark of being a Bedouin in Jordan, was actually a sign of being someone who was settled and too cosmopolitan to be taken as a hujjah, as an authority in grammar by the Basrans. So the Basrans had higher standards. Also, some of their differences is that they used terms like jar instead of khat. No. The Kufan school was dominated. So Kufa is now primarily a Shia. I guess you could say it's been kind of absorbed into Najaf, and so the Arab aristocracy really settled in Kufa, and what you find about the Kufans, although I mean you would maybe a lot of people would associate it with Abu Hanifa, for example, but Kufa was very much a land of Arab aristocracy, and because of that, that's also related to Shiism being rooted there, and so their idea in grammar was more related to the idea of accepting beautiful verses of poetry from so and so and what have you, because they came up with something that's just really great, and so they had far lower standard, or the Kufans had lower standards than the Basrans in terms of what they accepted. They were very accepting of beauty, even if it didn't quite match the standards of the rules that the Basran school had set. Now, the problem with the Kufans is that they were trapped on the inside, and so there were and there are too many special cases, so they could not simplify Arabic enough because perhaps of how well they had internalized Arabic. And one of the things I say that an interesting comparison of the method of the Arabs and the non-Arabs in understanding Arabic is that the Arabs, obviously, I mean, this is an oversimplification. The Arabs basically have ma'rifah, and the A'ajim, the non-Arabs, have ilm, right? And they're two different things, right? To know something is not like knowing facts about it, and so but sometimes this ma'rifah acts as a veil, right? And so the Kufan school were kind of trapped on the inside, and there are too many special cases. They had a longer, less consistent rule base, Now, sometimes they have more natural parsing than the Basrans. The Basrans come across as being like, please just kill me now. Sometimes when you repeat a word that's unnecessary to repeat logically, just because that's how Basran parsing works. So the Kufans have more natural parsing, but it's overly complex and confusing now. And they had lower standards with respect to Shoah. Right. The late school is mainly Basran and some Kufan, right? And so what you'll find in general is that any discipline that the Persians come up with is stands the test of time, right? And the reason why Arud stood the test of time, but it's actually being replaced right now, is because no one else understood it because it was so complicated. But that's changing. Alhamdulillah. I'm exaggerating. So the late school is mainly Basran, some Kufan. And Ibn Hisham and Ibn Malik are mainly the imams of the late school. They did a simplification of some matters, such as past tense verb parsing. It's simpler in the late school. They're also the i'rab became more accurate and more formal. So in the old school, often people would say Zaydun Fiddar as the i'rab. They would say Fiddar is khabar, but the late school really formalized that onto متعلق بخبر محذوف تقديره كائن. I need to add a ha there at the end of تقدير. So زيد في الدار خبر متعلق or متعلق بخبر محذوف تقديره كائن. This is really how should I say this is formal late school i'rab, right? And so you're not allowed to say that something like fiddar is just a khabar, but you have to specify that it's actually that it's connected to a khabar to keep things consistent. And so there's a we have this universal application of operator theory throughout the late school, and operator theory is basically like a function. So you have like a basically there are more than verbs can be operators, but other things can be operators as well. So what you have, for example, with the idea of a verb, is that a verb operates on one or more asma, on one or more isms, and a verb. The one thing that every verb always must do, okay, is it must do rafa of exactly one ism, right? A verb may have zero or more mansubs, but it must have exactly one marfu', right? And so a verb would be an operator that forces one ism at least to be in a state of rafa. And that ism that's in a state of rafa, not only a fa'il, no. And so it can be a fa'il, it can be a na'ib fa'il, or it can be an ism kana, it can be a khabar, it can be a khabar inna, right? So that's why I say that every verb must have one marfu'a, right? And that's why I didn't say that it has to have a fa'il. It can be a fa'il, it can be a na'ib fa'il, it can be an ism kana, or it can be a khabar inna, right? Like later, right? So the important thing is that, for example, as a verb, as an operator, a verb always does rafa of exactly one ism, never two, never zero, right? But it can do nasb of zero or more verbs. No. Right. Now, Qatr al-Nada, this is Ibn Hisham's easiest work. His vastest work is Al-Mughni. And what's great about this book is that you're not being spoon-fed anything, but you're watching the mind of an imam, right? And so you're witnessing the cogs turning in the mind of an imam. Why? Because Ibn Hisham here, it's interesting. He wasn't here to be orthodox. but to define orthodoxy, right? And as such, what he does is you're finding him arguing for some of his choices here and being a bit defensive, and you learn from this. Like, for example, he in this book, and he changes his mind across books, and that's typical of great imams. What you'll find in this book, for example, is that he will not call it Jam'a Mu'annath Salim. He will not call it sound feminine plural. Right? He calls it Al-Jam'u bil-Alif wa Ta'i al-Mazidatayn, right? Because he'll tell you because it's neither sound, and then he'll give you an example, and nor is it necessarily feminine, right? And so it's really quite a joy to read the work, this work. But one of the things that you must do is, some of you probably have the habit of, you look at a matan and you think, okay, I'll read this matan and I'll memorize it, and then as soon as you come by an example, you think, yeah, that's fine. No, I don't recommend that you memorize Qatr and Nada. Memorizing the rules, yes. Memorizing it itself, no. But I do absolutely recommend or require that you memorize the i'rab of the examples, at least such that if they were presented to you, you don't have to know the shawahid, but if they're presented to you, if someone says, okay, there's this ayah in Qatr al-Nada that he discusses, or there's this verse of poetry in Qatr al-Nada that Ibn Hisham discusses, what is its i'rab? Absolutely, you must have that memorized, or be able to say it from memory. Right. Other texts. So the most important text to cover here is the matan and course study notes. To read ahead, read Sharh Qatr al-Nada by Ibn Hisham, with the comments by Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid. Yasin al-Fakihi. So Fakihi's Mujib al-Nada is absolutely wonderful, but it's quite deep. So if you're not at that level, don't bother. If you are at the level where you really want to go deep on some issues, then yes, by Yasin al-Fakihi. So Fakihi's sharh is called Mujib al-Nida, and then there's Yasin has a gloss on it, a hashia, and there are at least 2 shuruh shawahid that were discussed in the group. Right. Now, morphology and Hans Ver. So we're not going to do sarf in this course, but I thought that this chart would be useful for you. And so the idea here is that who here is not familiar with these forms is question number 1. Is there anyone here, and please don't be shy, is there anyone here that isn't familiar with these forms? Because if I don't need to, then I won't get into a discussion of this. But if you're not familiar with these, you really need to understand them. Is everyone okay? If you are familiar with these, can you please let me know in the chat box? Okay. Okay. So yes, good, excellent. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Fine. So the idea is the following: when you open up Hans Ver, okay, okay. Now we talked about these forms. Is there anyone here who is not familiar with Hans Ver? Everyone knows Hans Ver. Okay, right. So when you open up Hans Ver and you look at the meaning of a verb, now Hans Ver, just to warn you, and this also is the case with Lane's lexicon. So they're both organized by verb, by form, right? So if you want to look up fa'ala, for example, I don't know, daraba or qatala, right? That would be form 1. If you want to look up fa'ala, you'd look up in Hans Ver form 2 Roman numerals, whereas in Lane's lexicon, I think he uses Arabic numerals, etc., etc. So, and then what Hans Ver will separate them, as well as Lane's lexicon, according to the verb form number here. And so this shortcuts your search towards finding exactly the right verb form. And another thing that's important to pay attention to is the use of the use of huruf or the use of prepositions with a verb, because often, I mean, just as in English, to stand up to someone is something different than to stand with them or to stand down to them, right? And so, seeing how the words are used with various prepositions is useful, as well as memorizing this chart. Now, what you'll notice is that they're all normalized except for the masdar of the first form. That has to be memorized along with the jama' taksir of words. It doesn't have a fixed form type. So let's talk about types of inflection. So now we're getting into this idea of the basic concepts or the elementary concepts of Nahu. So we're going to do this a little bit quickly. I want you to take these ideas and think about them deeply after class. Okay, so because we're going to cover a lot of material that you've seen before, but I want to summarize it out. So the types of inflection. How can words change? Well, one of them is explicit. You can hear the change. جاء زيد ورأيت زيدا ومررت بزيد. That's explicit. And that's mu'arab lafzan. Another is mu'arab taqdiran. Taqdiran means that really it should be lafzan, but there's just something that came up in the word that stops it from being pronounced in Arabic. Like جاء القاضي. What should we actually say by default? Like, what would, if we were to just follow the rules, what would we say? We'd say, what would we say to, that's marfu', right? Qadi is the fa'il. So what would we say if we were following the rules blindly?
جاء القاضي.
Exactly. If we're following the rules blindly, we would say جاء القاضي, right? Now, why don't we do that? Because here, it's not impossible, but it's too heavy on the Arabic tongue. And so we would call that thiqal. Right? Whereas marartu bil fata, that's here it's we'd also call that i'rab muqaddar, but here it would be ta'addur. You cannot pronounce a haraka on an alif, right? There is no way to pronounce a haraka on an alif. The only way to do that would be to add a hamza, and then you've changed the word. So there's implicitly inflected. Then there's uninflected, which is mabni. However, if a word, okay, so here's something I want you to internalize. Okay, just like I told you, one of the fundamental gems of Arabic grammar is that every verb always, all the time, does rafa of one ism. That's it, only one ism, and it doesn't have to be its fa'il. It can be one of four things. It can be fa'il, na'ib fa'il, ism kana wa akhawatiha, khabar inna wa akhawatiha. Another one of those that you need to understand is that an ism is always mu'arab in a way. What do I mean by that? An ism is one of explicitly inflected, implicitly inflected, or uninflected, but it has a mahal min al-i'rab. Okay, so an ism and so write this down. An ism and a fi'l mudari', those two are always, they're always mu'arab. إما لفظا أو تقديرا أو محلا, and that's what I mean by mab. So the ism, no matter what type of ism, no matter what type of fi'l mudari', okay, no matter what type of ism, no matter what type of fi'l mudari', it's one of these first three. Okay, no matter, I'm going to say this a third time. No matter what type of ism, no matter what type of fi'l mudari', it's one of these first three. It's mu'arab lafzan, أو تقديرا أو محلا. Right? When I say جاء هذا, هذا is a fa'il, or I mean, if we want to be more accurate, we'd say ذا is the fa'il, هذا حرف تنبيه. ذا is a fa'il, مبني على السكون في محل رفع لأنه فاعل. Okay? So is this clear that every ism, every single ism, no matter what, every single ism and every single fi'l mudari' is mu'arab lafzan or taqdiran, or if it's mabni, then it's mu'arab mahallan. So far, so good?
Yes, Ustaz.
No.
Ustad,
Yes.
what's the difference between more تقديرا and mabni if it's not changing?
The difference is that the mabni words typically are mabni because their form stops them from being expressed in another way. Taqdiran, their form just stops the haraka, but if they had some other letters that made up the word, then it wouldn't be that case. It's because they end, basically the implicit ones is just because they end in a long vowel. That's their problem, right? The mabni ones have a different issue related to them. Now,
If I get it good, the reason is different, but practically is not big difference, you know, in the practically.
sorry, could you repeat?
I said like if I answer good, the sabab is different. Why it's
Yes,
not
the sab-
changing, but at the end it doesn't matter, yeah. In the like like in the praktijk, you know, practically.
In the what? Practically?
Practically, yeah.
Well, practically they are a little bit different because the harakat muqaddara are sometimes muqaddara in some cases, but not in others. Right? Like, for example, you'd say, رأيت القاضية. Right? You'd say, جاء القاضي ومررت بالقاضي, but رأيت القاضية. So it is actually a different case than being uninflected, even practically. It's different. Okay. So the first three are for asma and af'al mudari'ah. The uninflectable means a word that is not inflected. So it's mabni, but it's not just any mabni. Its syntactic rule never changes. And that's what we mean by la mahalla lahu min al-i'rab. Okay? What type of words? So we said that the ism and the fi'l mudara fit into the first three categories. What type of words fit into this fourth last category? What type of words are uninflectable? Go ahead.
Harf and amr.
The harf and the fi'l amr. Good. Okay, good. What have we forgotten about? What have we not? The fi'l madi. Exactly. Where does the fi'l madi go?
مبني.
Well, which one? Usually, the fi'l madi is لا محل له من الإعراب. Usually. However, in جاء زيد جئت, there it does have a mahal min al-i'rab. And if you understand why, then you're on your way to understanding what i'rab actually means. Why does it have a mahal min al-i'rab when I say if I say جاء زيد, جاء فعل ماض مبني على الفتح لا محل له من الإعراب. It fits into this last category. And that's where it goes by default, right? But if I say إن جاء زيد جئت, then we'd say جاء فعل ماض مبني على الفتح في محل جزم فعل الشرط. Why did it change? What is i'rab? It's a change that reflects a change in meaning. جاء stopped being a past tense verb. A fi'l madi never stops being a past tense verb. In this case, it did. And that's why it has a mahal min al-i'rab. Got it?
Yes.
Ustad, apologize,
Yes, go
but
ahead.
like, from my understanding, mabni and la mahalla lahu min al-i'rab is the same, or is like the explanation of the mabni?
No, it's additional. So when it's la mahalla lahu min al-i'rab, what it means is that you could never put a mu'rab word in its place.
What do you mean?
Place. Yeah. So when you say that a word is la mahalla lahu min al-i'rab, it means that a mu'rab word could never occupy its place. Okay? It means that it never has a role that will change grammatically, that will change syntactically. That's what it means when we say it's la mahalla lahu min al-i'rab.
Naam. So mabni, alle words that are mabni are also la mahalla min al-i'rab, صح?
So it can be mabni and have a mahal min al-i'rab. Like if I say جاء هذا, what is هذا here? It's mabni, right?
Yeah.
هذا doesn't change, right? It's مبني.
نعم.
However, it has a محل من الإعراب because it's a فاعل.
نعم.
So we'd say it's مبني في محل رفع. And how do we know it has a محل من الإعراب? Because I can put a معرب word in its place. Instead of هذا, can't I say زيد?
نعم.
So this is مبني, but it has a محل من الإعراب. Why? Because I could put. So what's the محل من الإعراب? What does that mean? It means put a معرب word in its place. Okay. So جاء هذا. Okay, هذا is مبني على السكون. هذا مبني على السكون, right? Because the حرف مد is always second. هذا مبني على السكون. So جاء هذا. So it's مبني على السكون في محل رفع لأنه فاعل. Yeah, لأنه فاعل, right? Because if we put زيد in its place, it would be جاء زيد ورأيت زيدا ومررت بزيد. So what you see is that words like هذا, which are أسماء, okay, they are مبني, but they have a محل من الإعراب. Okay, so there's four levels here. One is معرب لفظ. The second is معرب تقديرا. The third is مبني, but it has a محل من الإعراب. Why? Because it's an اسم or a فعل مضارع. And an اسم or a فعل مضارع, even when it's مبني, has a محل من الإعراب. Okay? Are you okay with that so far?
نعم.
And then the final one is لا محل له من الإعراب, when it is uninflectable. It is not just uninflected, it's uninflectable. You cannot inflect it. It doesn't make any sense to even talk about inflecting this word, and that's what we mean by لا محل له من الإعراب. This is like like the حروف, like the فعل أمر, and like the فعل ماضي, with one exception. So this fourth category applies to حروف, فعل أمر, and the فعل ماضي, with one exception. Okay, moving forward. Fine, let's take a look at this chart, and if you feel overwhelmed, that's okay. So let's just take a quick look at this chart. So we see that the ism, let's start with the harf. Are we okay?
Yes.
Can everyone
Yes.
hear me?
Yes.
نعم.
Okay, perfect. عزمت على صلاة العشاء في وقتها. Okay, طيب. So let's start by looking at the harf here, because it's actually the easiest. Okay. So when we look at this harf over here, we see that the حروف are three types. A harf can be خاص بالاسم, خاص بالفعل, or مشترك. So there are حروف that only act upon أسماء, they only act upon أفعال, and those that act upon either. Right? That doesn't really concern us too much. But when we look at these four categories, معرب إعرابا ظاهرا, there is no حرف ever that's معرب إعراب ظاهر. There is no حرف ever that's معرب إعراب مقدر. There is no حرف ever that is مبني وله محل من الإعراب. Rather, all حروف, no matter what, so red here on this chart means that it never happens. End of discussion. Okay, green means it always happens. End of discussion. And so wherever you'll see green, all the rest must be red. Okay, but where you see red, there you may either have green or white. White means that there's some detail. So if we look at the حروف, the حروف and the فعل أمر, no matter what, the first three categories don't apply to them. There is never any إعراب ظاهر with a حرف or a فعل أمر. There is never any إعراب مقدر with a حرف or a فعل أمر. There is never, it's never just the مبني and has a محل من الإعراب with a حرف or a فعل أمر. Rather, all حروف, all أفعال الأمر always are مبني لا محل من الإعراب. End of discussion. Okay, طيب. So that's we did up the فعل أمر. The فعل ماضي is almost has a perfect record, but it's a little different than the فعل أمر. When we look at the فعل ماضي, is the فعل ماضي ever معرب? Never. Neither ظاهر nor مقدر. Can it have a محل من الإعراب? Yes. Like in جاء زيد أكرمته. So here it has a محل من الإعراب. and the default, so whenever you see this word asl, it means it's the default. The asl is that the fi'l madi is mabni la mahalla lahu min al-i'rab. The only exception is when it is a fi'l shart or a jawab shart of a adat shart jazm. Okay, so that's the fi'l madi. The fi'l mudari', the asl is that it's mu'rab i'raban zahiran. Okay, like yaktubu wa yaktubani. Can it be i'rab muqaddaran? Yes, like yad'u, yajri, and yashqa. Can it be mabni wa lahu mahal min al-i'rab? Yes, if it's connected to nun al-niswa or nun al-tawkid. In that case, it's mabni, right? Remember, yaqbidna. What is the i'rab of yaqbidna? أولم يروا إلى الطير فوقهم صافات ويقبضن. Who will do the i'rab of يقبضن?
Noon and Niswa is the fa'il.
The nun niswa is the fa'al. So what's the verb? What's the i'rab of the verb? يقبضن فعل ماض. Sorry, فعل مضارع. Sorry, يقبضن. Go ahead. فعل مضارع. Do you know this terminology?
فعل
مبني
مضارع
على السكون.
مبني على السكون في محل رفع.
Exactly. So يقبضن is فعل مضارع مبني على السكون. Why? لاتصاله بنون النسوة. So if you don't know that, write it down. يقبضن فعل مضارع يقبضن فعل مضارع مبني على السكون لاتصاله بنون النسوة. When we say مبني على السكون, what حرف are we looking at? You're always looking at the end of the verb. The verb's root is qabada, right? So it's the dad is the last letter. So يقبض, there's a sukun, right? And because there's a sukun there, it's mabni ala sukun. And why is it mabni ala sukun? Or that's the sign of it being mabni. Why is it mabni ala sukun? لاتصاله بنون النسوة. And why is ولا يكونا مبني على الفتح لاتصاله بنون التوكيد. But even in that case, even though it's mabni, it still has a محل من الإعراب. Okay, so the fi'l mudari', the default is that it's mu'rab i'raban zahiran. It can be mu'rab i'raban muqaddaran in the case of verbs that end in long vowels like yad'u wa yajri wa yashqa, because they end in long vowels. So you don't end up saying yad'u, right? But you would say yad'uwa, right? And it can be mabni. And it can be mabni, but then it would have a mahal min al-i'rab. And then as for the asma, if it's a damir, then it's always mabni and it has a mahal min al-i'rab.
One
Okay.
question: is
Yes, go ahead.
everything that has that doesn't have a mahal min al-i'rab is mabni as well? But
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. نعم. بينهما خصوص وعموم مطلق. نعم. So one is a proper subset of the other. Correct. نعم. And so in the case of a mudmar word, okay, so let's see. يقبضن فعل مضارع مبني على السكون ونون النسوة فاعل. Correct. But you have to say في محل رفع. مبني على السكون في محل رفع. نعم.
So Sheikh, the يغبض. So I say it like يغبض في فعل مضارع لاتصال بالنون النسوة في محل رفع.
Okay, so let me write it out. يقبضن فعل مضارع مبني على السكون لاتصاله بنون النسوة. فعل مضارع في محل رفع ونون النسوة ضمير متصل مبني على الفتح في محل رفع لأنه فاعل. Okay, so let's take a look at this. يقبضنا. Oh, yeah, that should say فعل. Sorry, my eyes didn't really. Or I sent this to. No, I sent this to one person. Let me send this to all of you. 1 second. Okay, give me a sec. Let me change this to the entire group. Okay. يقبضنا. Okay. يقبضنا فعل مضارع مبني على السكون لاتصاله بنون النسوة في محل رفع، ونون النسوة ضمير متصل مبني على الفتح في محل رفع لأنه فاعل. Is that clear to everyone? If
Yes.
not, speak up now, because we need to be speaking the same language. Okay, so basically what you see here is you see that the mudmar is the damir is an ism that always has a mahal min al-rafa, or sorry, that always has a mahal min al-i'rab and is never actually expressed. Never actually expresses i'rab in any other way, and also it's never has la mahallahu min al-i'rab. Whenever you have a damir, you have to speak about its mahal. Okay, the mudhar, the ism zahir, the default is that it's mu'rab i'raban zahiran, although it can be mu'rab i'raban muqaddaran, like if it ends in a vowel, like qadi wal fata wa ghulami. Now someone might ask, well, what if the ism ends in a waw? How do you do the i'rab? Who can tell me an Arabic word that ends in a waw?
Bubble.
Sorry?
For verb,
Amr.
normally it's file.
نحو.
Sorry, in a waw that's a med. In Nahu, it's not a med. It's actually a consonant there. There aren't any. That's the point. But it came up because of Tokyo, right? So Tokyo pushed a new frontier in Arabic grammar. So yeah, Tokyo fits in there as well. Al-Qadi along with Al-Qadi wal-Fata wa Ghulami. طيب. And another if it's an if it is there's a certain small set of words that are not dama'ir, that don't end in vowels but are nonetheless mabni, like hadami, a woman's name, it always ends in a kasra, amsi and qablu. Naam. And then the ism mubham, like alladhi, a mubham is like alladhi and like hada, right? To use those as quick examples. So the only time that it does i'rab zahir is in the muthanna, right? You say alladhani and hadani, or alladhaini and hadaini. It never has i'rab muqaddar. However, it can often be the default is that it's mabni, right? It's mabni but has a mahal min al-i'rab, right? So if we were to say جاء الذي أحبه, or رأيت الذي أحبه, or مررت بالذي أحبه, in that case, am I not saying in each one of those, isn't it changing from a mahal of rafa to nasb to jar? Yes. So it's mabni, but it has a mahal min al-i'rab. Okay, right. Moving forward. So we're going to talk a little about operators. So this is different than the fa'il and the fa'il and the maf'ul bihi. So let's talk about what operators are. We'll try to get the we might be going a little over time, but let's talk about this. So the idea is the following: all of speech is saying A about B. You're saying a predicate about a subject, and that's called isnad. And this has nothing to do with hadith science. So this is called isnad. It's predication, or f of x, where you are taking x as the subject and x is the subject and f is the predicate. So when you're saying f of x, now in Arabic we call the subject the musnad ilayh, and the predicate is the musnad. Now, as you know, there are two types of sentences in Arabic, and so when you have a jumla ismiyya, the musnad ilayhi is the mubtada, and the musnad is the khabar. Whereas in a verbal sentence, the musnad ilayhi is the what? In a verbal sentence, the musnad ilayhi is the what?
File.
It's the fa'il or the, get used to saying it's the marfu'. It's the marfu' of the verb. Correct. Right? Because the marfu' of the verb, so I want you to expand your horizons. Instead of fa'il, there are 4 things that it could be. It could be a fa'il, it could be a na'ib fa'il, it could be, sorry?
خبر إن.
Exactly. And you might say, well, what does khabar inna have to do? Well, some of akhawat inna are actually verbs, right? And inna, actually, part of its i'rab is we say harfun mushabbahun bil fi'l. Right? So inna is actually, it acts like a verb. And that's not just something they're making up. It actually does act like a verb. And maybe we'll talk about that, or maybe we won't. But in any case, so in a verb, so in a jumla ismiyya, the musnad ilayh, or the subject, is the mubtada, and the khabar is the musnad. In a verbal sentence, the musnad ilayh is the fa'il, or it's na'ib, or something like that, and the musnad is the verb. Now, if you think, okay, well, do I have to memorize that? No. I mean, of course you do have to memorize it, but understand it, and it won't seem hard. Okay, the musnad ilayh, or the subject, is what you're talking about. So when I say qama zaydun, I'm talking about Zayd. So therefore, he's the musnad ilayh. Okay, when I say Zaydun Karimun, I'm talking about Zayd. So it all makes sense. So you don't have to memorize this and find difficulty in it. You just need to understand it. So the musnad ilayh is the subject, and the musnad is the predicate. And these take 2 different forms. And these 2 types, these 2 things, the musnad and the musnad ilayh, they are both called what? Who knows what the musnad and the musnad ilayh, what are they called? What is each one called in Arabic grammar? At least according to the late Arab school. Each one of them is called a umda. Okay? These 2 are called the plural of umda is umad, right? They are essential parts of the sentence. And whatever isn't an umda, we're going to go over time today. So if you have something to do, that's cool. You can listen to the recording later, inshallah. I'll try to wrap up, but we need to cover this because we need to get into the text. But there are fundamental ideas we need to cover. So the umda, the default is a umda is always marfu'a. Okay. Okay. So write this down as a rule. Umda is marfu'a by default. Okay. So that means your mubtada is marfu'a. Your khabar is marfu'. Your fi'l, if it's i'rabable, is marfu' by default, and the fa'il, or the na'ib fa'il, or the ism inna, or anything before the nawasikh enter upon it, if it's a umda, it's marfu'. And so one of the things that I want you to internalize is this idea of something being marfu'a, meaning that it's a umda, it's a fundamental syntactic portion of a sentence. It's the musnad or the musnad ilayh. Now, sometimes you need those fadlat for the sentence to make sense, right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْنَا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا لَاعِبِينَ. La'ibin is, in terms of grammar, it's a fadla. But without that, the ayah totally, the ayah becomes kufr, right? To believe in that, the meaning of that ayah without the fadla at the end is kufr, right? So we're not talking about that umda is the only important part of the sentence to the exclusion of a fadla. We're not talking about semantics. We're talking about what makes a sentence, right? What makes a sentence is a umda, and a umda is marfu' by default until something acts upon. Okay, right, moving forward. So what are the operators? Basically, so what's the tasawwur al-mas'ala? What's the fundamental idea? That if something is marfu'a, then it requires something that put it into that state, which is called a rafi'. If something's mansub, it requires a nasib. If something's majroor, it requires a jar. And if something's majzoom, it requires a jazm. Pretty simple stuff. Whenever you say that something's marfu'a, you have to go and search for what put it in that state. Now, what is amal? Amal means making is the actual rafa or the nasb or the jar or the jazm. The amil is what causes that amal in the ma'mul. The ma'mul, other than being the name of a tasty biscuit in Arabic, the ma'mul in grammar is the word that's actually marfu' or mansub or majroor or majzum. And Jurjani has a nice book called Mi'at Amil. Of those, 98 are lafzi, meaning whenever you are looking for the amil of what made something marfu' or mansub or majroor or majzum, it's always another word. It's always another word. It's always another word, except in two cases. Okay? There are only two awamil. There are only two operators that are abstract. What are the two operators that are abstract? It's in order to get away from recursion, or as not a circular reference. So what cannot have a lafz affected because it occurs right at the start? What word requires an abstract amil? What type of a word? A mubtada would be one, and its amil is ibtida. So that's an abstract operator. What's the other one? There's one more. There's one for asma and there's one for af'al. So the ibtida, okay, what about the fi'l? So it has to act upon a fi'l, but what is it called? It's called at-tajarrud. It's called at-tajarrud. Tajarrud. Tajarrud means basically being divested. It's having no nasib or jazm. The existence, the lack of existence of a nasib or jazm is the other abstract operator. So okay, so whenever you see something marfu', you go around and you look for its rafa'. Whenever you see something majzoom, go around and look for its jazm, etc. Okay. When you go around looking for that rafa' and that nasib and that jar and that jazm, it will always be another word, whether implicit or explicit in that sentence. It will always be another word. However, there are two exceptions. With a mubtada, the operator that puts it into rafa is ibtida, because there's nothing else. In the case of the Kufans, you actually had circular references. The mubtada did rafa of the khabar, and the khabar did rafa of the mubtada. And there's actually a nice response by the Basrans as to why they rejected that. And no, I will not Google that for you, nor will I translate it. But you're happy to look it up, or you're welcome to look it up. So the first, the two operators that are not lafzi, are ibtida, that operates on a mubtada, making it marfu'a, and the tajarrud min or an nasibi wal jazm, which makes a fi'l mudara marfu'a. And so you have many operators across 8 categories. They're all lafzi except for 2 that are abstract. Concrete operators are verbs, nouns, and particles. So these concrete operators, they can be verbs, they can be nouns, and they can be particles. They operate upon inflected and uninflected words, but they don't ever operate upon uninflectable words. So a amil is a amil nahawi. It's a amil, it's a syntactic operator. Okay, type. So when we say daraba Zaydun Amra, so daraba here has la mahalla lahu min al-i'rab. Daraba is acting as an operator. It acts upon Zayd and it puts it into a rafa state. Zayd is marfu' so the rafa here is daraba and Zayd is marfu'. Okay, the amal is rafa and the alama is dhamma, and the reason is because it's a fa'il. Okay, daraba also operates upon Amr. It makes Amr into Amran. Notice how we drop the waw when we put it in the nasb state. It makes Amr into Amran. The amal so daraba here, it's operating as a rafa with respect to Zayd, and it's operating as a nasib with respect to Amr. Okay? Notice nothing operates on daraba because it's la mahalla lahu min al-i'rab. So this is operator theory. This is a fi'l acting as an operator. All good? Are we happy?
Ustad?
Yes, go ahead.
So this is just so Amr has a wow. What if it was Umar? Would it also just be Amr with the alif or?
No, because Umar is mamnu' min as-sarf, so it never takes tanween.
Okay. Oh,
So
excellent.
that's
Thank you.
why there's no reason for disambiguation here. So we drop the waw.
No, excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
So, Sheikh, in the last example, Daraba, basically it's acted like, even though it's Daraba, it's mabni la mahalla laha min al-i'rab, but it acted upon Zaidun, so it made the Zaidun file. So file is marfu, and it acted upon Amran, so maf'ulun bihi, it made Amran mansub.
Exactly. And so here, the operators are often la mahalla laha min al-i'rab. Like look at what we said here earlier. So we said that concrete operators can be verbs, they can be nouns, and they can be particles. So yes, so something that has la mahalla laha min al-i'rab it can be an operator. That's correct. Yes. So even though daraba la mahalla lahu min al-i'rab, it is a rafi' of Zaid, and it is a nasib of Amr. All good? Moving forward. And so if we look at Zaydun Karimun, ibtida is like, sorry, I'm using like function notation in case you're familiar with math, and if you aren't, then you probably hate me. So you say this operator of ibtida or predication of ibtida is acting upon Zayd, and it does rafa of it. Okay, and the Kufiyin say that Zayd acts upon Kareem and Kareem acts upon Zayd. So no. And if we look at verbal and particular operators, so ذهب زيد إلى المدرسة. So what we say is that ذهب did rafa to Zayd, and ila does, and this is an important point, so I try not to phase out yet, try to stay focused with us. We're almost done, inshallah. So ila is an interesting one, because with a harf jar, ila operates upon that, and it puts it into a jar state, right? So however, the jar and the majroor also need to be connected to something that's either a verb or has the power of a verb. And if you're a little bit confused about that, that's okay, because we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. So whenever you have a harf jar, the harf jar is an operator, but that harf jar has to take its majroor and connect it to a verb. And what does that connection mean? We'll talk about that, inshallah, in future classes. Okay. So, and then here you can see how something can be both an operator and an operand. Okay. So when we take a look at len, what do we say? We say len. Who can give me the i'rab of len?
Harfun mabniun ala sukun la mahalla lahu min al-i'rab.
Okay.
Harfun nasbin, sorry.
Harfu, what was that?
Harfun nasbin and naf'in, right?
Harfu nafyin. Harfu nafyin wa nasbin. No. And you could probably say other smart things. مبني على السكون مبني على السكون لا محل له من الإعراب, because it's a harf. Okay, so len operates on yadrus and makes it what? Mansub. But yadrus acts upon Zayd and makes Zayd marfu'. So therefore, len is an operator with respect to yadrus, and yadrus is an operand with respect to len, but yadrus is an operator with respect to Zayd, but Zayd isn't an operator with respect to anyone else. Are we good there?
Yeah, is another example of this like compound idafa, where it could be both an amil and a ma'mul.
Yes. So if you can, did you have an example ready?
No, but I mean it's
Babu Bayti Amrin, for example.
Sorry, what was that?
Like إضافة مركبة, Babu Bayti Amrin or something like that. But no, I don't know.
Yes. Yep, for sure. That would be a good one. I was actually thinking of something else entirely, and so I won't talk about that. But if you're interested, ask me in the group. No, because that would just okay. So let's try to wrap this up. And so يدرس زيد, يدرس is in a state of رفع because it's تجرد. So as we said, there are only two abstract operators. And so يدرس زيد, يدرس is معمول with respect to تجرد, and it is a عامل with respect to زيد. Okay. What is not an operator? And this is our very last slide for the day, and then we can go off and celebrate. Okay, fine. So what is not an operator? So not everything that changes the end of a word is a syntactic operator, okay? When we say نظرت إليه, okay, whereas دعوت له, in both those cases, the ha is a ضمير that's mabni. Now it's mabni in the first case upon the kasra. In the second case, it's mabni upon the dhamma. In both cases, it's fi mahalli jar. Its ending changed. Is this i'rab? Its ending changed. Is this i'rab?
No,
Why not?
it's just for the ease. It's for the ease of pronunciation.
Exactly. This is a phonological operator, not a syntactic operator. In terms of syntax, they're exactly the same. They're majroor connected to a verb. They're syntactically identical. So when we say that the ending of a word changes, we mean the ending of a word as it changes, as it reflects, and this is critical, and this is critical, and this is critical, as it reflects a change in the syntactic role of the word, not its pronunciation, not its meaning, its syntactic role. Okay, we're all good there?
Yep.
What
Okay.
was the word you used as opposed to syntactical? You said it's not for it started with an F, I think.
Phonological or phonetic. I always get those words wrong, so you should look them up. But what I mean is that it's not about pronunciation, okay? It's not about pronunciation, which is what is happening here, right? Arabs like whenever you have kasra before a ha or a ya sakina, Arabs will make that ha. Saying alayhu is pretty difficult, right? So saying alayhu is difficult, or saying bihu it's related to thiqal. So that is only related to sound, so it has nothing to do with syntax. All good?
Yes.
Okay, we'll stop here. We'll try not to go that much over time in the future.
Just two questions. You know, يقبضنا. Why was ضمير مبني على الفتح? ويقبضنا.
That's the way Nun and Niswa is. Nun and Niswa is mabni al fath because Arabs spoke that way.
Okay, and the second question, sorry, do you know when you went on Zaydun Karimun on the slide before, you put Mubtada Khabar, would it be Mawsuf Sifa? Or is it the same?
Sorry, what was that regarding?
If you go on the slide before Zaydun Karimun.
Okay.
Yeah, you put Mubtada and then Khabar. I thought when it's like this, it's a Mawsuf Sifa. Or is it the same thing?
So I don't know. I don't know if that is valid Desi terminology. Desis do things a little bit different in terms of their terminology. So I don't know. In Arabic, we would not call it that.
Okay.
I don't think it's not in Desi either because Zayd is ma'arifa, Kareem is nakira. It has to match.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah. Now we would say that. See, in Arabic, here's the thing. Kareem, we would consider it a slifa because slifa in Arabic often means mushtaq, right? It doesn't, like slifa in Arabic doesn't mean what it does to Desis. Slifa in what Desis call slifa is what Arabs call nat.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is not a nat. Kareem is not a nat. But when you say sifa to an Arab, sometimes it just means mushtaq. It just means like it's ism fa'al, sifa mubalagha, etc. Right? So So could this would be called a sifa, but not. It's not a nat. No, it isn't. It's a khabar.
Yeah, got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. If you have any further questions, please ask them in the group. هذا وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والله تعالى أعلم وأحكم وهو حسبنا ونعم الوكيل. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام أستاذ، جزاك الله خير.